morning, everybody. Welcome to the Rising Powers and Contested Orders in the Multipolar System Conference, organized by the Institute of International Relations of PUC, the BRICS Policy Center, and the GIGA Center in Hamburg. We have a few introductory remarks from our dean, or our dean's representative this morning. And after that, we have a keynote speech from Marcelo Neri, who is the Minister of Strategic Affairs and President of the Institute of Applied Economics in Brazil. So I will give the floor for Professor Danilo Marcondes, who is the special advisor of the rector at PUC-Rio. After that, to Daniel, and I will make some remarks myself prior to give the floor to our guest, Marcelo Neri, this morning. So, Danilo, please.
Bom dia, bem-vindos a todos. Eu queria começar trazendo as desculpas do nosso reitor, Padre Josafá, por não poder estar presente hoje aqui, por conta de outro compromisso, mas ele me pediu para representá-lo e para ressaltar a importância para a universidade deste evento, desta conferência, do trabalho que vem sendo realizado pelo IRI, pelo nosso Instituto de Relações Internacionais, pelo BRICS Policy Center, e para dizer como a universidade está honrada de sediar essa conferência que reúne alguns dos maiores especialistas na área, que tem uma importância muito grande para as nossas pesquisas e, sobretudo, para o trabalho que vem sendo feito pelo IRI e, principalmente, pelo BRICS Policy Center, que é o trabalho de aproximar discussões acadêmicas, pesquisa, com questões do interesse para a sociedade, questões de interesse para o país, questões de interesse para toda a nossa discussão de política externa e de participação do Brasil no cenário internacional. Nesse sentido, nós consideramos que essa conferência realiza todo esse papel e representa para nós exatamente esse objetivo maior da universidade, que é trabalhar nesse sentido. Então, eu dou as boas-vindas a todos, desejo a todos um excelente trabalho e eu tenho certeza que os resultados que vai ser produzido durante esses 2 dias nessa conferência serão muito importantes para nós. Então, bem-vindos a todos e bom trabalho.
Obrigado, Danilo. Passo a palavra, sorry. Thank you, Danilo. I give the floor to Daniel Flames, please. Please, Daniel.
Muito obrigado. Bom dia a todos e todas também do meu lado e bem-vindo no nome do Instituto Alemão de Estudos Globais e Regionais. But now I will switch to English to make everybody understand. Is that microphone working? Are you understanding me well? I mean, many of us met each other already on former conferences of the Regional Powers Network, and many of us met each other already on former conferences of the Regional Powers Network, others not. Indeed, this time we tried to extend the circle of the RPN scholars and also extend the circle of the institutions that are participating in the Regional Powers Network. I think like 2/3 of you have not participated so far, or nearly 2/3 in former conferences. The idea in bringing you together, because we have been asked already what was the criterion of the composition of this very distinguished circle I find of scholars. We just looked into the literature with the view to the topic regional and the global contested order, and selected the articles that seemed most inspiring to us, and just invited the authors, and most of you followed our invitation. So that's the story behind the structure of this conference. And another criterion also has been that we wanted to see all world regions represented, and so we have region at least one, but usually more than one representative, which is was also very important for us. With regard to the fact that many of you are participating for the first time, I would say a few words also on the history, on the past of the Regional Powers Network, which has been founded like 5 years ago by the University of Oxford, Sciences Po Paris, and the German Institute of Global and Area Studies. Some of us are there participating from the beginning, like Andrew Harrell, who was very supportive from the beginning. The Sciences Po is represented by my namesake Daniel Bach, who's coming from Bordeaux, and others, as I said, have not participated in former formats. The conferences, the last two conferences we organized were in Stellenbosch, South Africa, focusing on rising powers and global redistribution, so an IPE topic. The very last conference in Hamburg, as the very first conference of the network as well, has been conducted in Hamburg. The last one has focused on the role of non-state actors in the changing world order, and we also enriched at least one or two papers reflecting this topic into this conference, because we always try to make sure to have some continuity and connect the results, at least the conclusions from the last conference, to this one. With a view to the principal objectives of the Regional Powers Network, just a few words. From the beginning, we have been very publication-oriented in our efforts, which means that from each conference, at least one publication, edited volume, or I remember the first conference, where one of the results was a special issue of the South African Journal of International Affairs that I had co-edited with my dear colleague Adam Habib from WITS in Joburg. And this time we also will aim, and I think we will aim very high with our publication projects, try to organize special issues of peer-reviewed journals, which is, let's say, the currency of academia, and we all, the one or the other way, depend on success in publishing and these publication fora. So we will get back to that in the very last panel and suggest you 3 publication projects, and we are willing to include all the papers that are part of the conference, and then we will approach the editors and see if it works, and if not, an alternative still will be to edit the publication or the conference result in an edited volume, but we will get back to that later on in the conference. Another important objective of the Regional Powers Network has been from the beginning the exchange of researchers amongst our institutions. I've been lately in Georgetown, represented by Charles Kapchan at this conference, and I will stay in Rio for the next semester at the State University at UERJ to teach international relations. A lot of our PhD students, for instance, went to Oxford to spend their research stays there. And this conference shall also inspire you and provide the base to think about projects as such, personal exchange, but also organize common panels at international conferences, research proposals to conduct common research projects, etc., are other objectives of the Regional Powers Network. In terms of collaboration with other institutions, in the first place I would like to use the occasion to thank our dear colleagues from the BRICS Policy Center and from IRI, Paulo Esteves, Monica Herz, and Renata Summa as well, who did a lot of work, and it was a great working with you. It was not always easy because the organizing team has been at least in 3 different countries over the half in the last year, but by some Skype conferences and a lot of dedication, and in this regard I would like to mention the outstanding role of Hannes Ebert, my dear colleague from GIGA, and also Renata Summa, who usually had to do the work on the ground and put everything in operation that we decided on the outputs of our Skype conferences. I think you did a great job, and thank you very much to both of you so far. Only a are the approaches that they bring to the table when it comes to international crisis, for instance? Are they offering any new solutions? What is their concrete contribution to the changing order and the future order? A second topic that will accompany us throughout the first day will be what is the difference of this order and the potential future order in terms of the interaction patterns, how states in particular, but also non-state actors, interrelate in this order, and how far this is different from former orders, bipolar orders, or other periods of multipolarity. And last, but maybe most interesting for me, what do the academic circles of the rising power countries offer in terms of new approaches in IR thinking, IR theory, in particular critical perspectives, innovative approaches. In particular, we will focus on that in the third panel and last panel of today. And tomorrow we will then turn to the regional level of analysis, meaning what are the reactions and strategic approaches of neighboring countries to the rise of the BRICS countries, which strategic approaches do they choose to react to the new asymmetries or increasing asymmetries in their regions. We will have three panels, one on South America, one on Africa, and one on Asia in this regard. But I will have the pleasure to introduce more extensively to that tomorrow morning, to the regional level of analysis, so I will be short now, and that's more time for the paper givers. So just another warm welcome from my side, and I wish a very inspiring conference and stimulating conference to all of us. Thank you.
So I would like to welcome all the participants to this conference, and also welcome all the public, the people who are attending to this conference today and tomorrow. It's not a very good date especially for our students, since there is a rock festival in the city, probably the biggest in the world, which will give us some problems with the traffic later on. But anyway, I would like really to welcome our students who actually came today or this morning, besides the rock festival. Let's see what's going to happen in the afternoon. We should give special grades or something like that. Anyway, this is a very important conference for IRI for a variety of reasons. The first reason, I guess, is due to the fact that in the last 10 years, IRI has tried to set an agenda, a research agenda, focusing on inequalities, asymmetries, and an attempt to build up a research program based on the South. 3 years ago, actually, we had the opportunity to create the BRICS Policy Center with a grant given by the city of Rio de Janeiro, to which we are really thankful. And with the BRICS Policy Center, we try to combine an exclusive research agenda with a more policy-oriented agenda as well, trying to discuss how inequalities are actually reproduced within the international system, and how the BRICS are contributing either for fight inequalities, or, which for me is more plausible, to reproduce or to recreate inequalities in another key. The BRICS Policy Center project is a successful one, as Danilo said. I guess it is really important to really, but it has, with the BRICS Policy Center, we had the opportunity to bring to Rio several scholars from the BRICS countries. We had the opportunity to host conferences like this, and we had the opportunity to engage within a network of think tanks, especially in the South. Together with the Research Institute for Applied Economics in Brazil, we took part in several BRICS forums, the last one in South Africa, and those forums were the opportunity to strengthen this network of institutions based on BRICS countries and other southern countries. Before I give the floor to Marcelo Neri, who will open this conference with a keynote speech, I would like to thank very much all the efforts made by our partner, GIGA. As Daniel said, we had 1 year of work prior to this conference, and it wasn't easy, not only because of the distance, but also because of the negotiation of the agenda, and that was really tough, but at the same time, we learned a lot with this process, and I guess both institutions are actually better off after this conference than they were before. So Daniel, I would like to thank you very, very much for all the efforts we made to put together this conference. As Daniel said, we have here probably, if not the state of art, or all the state of art, all the spectrum that conforms the state of art, we have almost all here. All the participants in one way or another are discussing the problem of the rising powers and its implications for the global order or the regional orders. I guess this will be, from the fact that we have the state of art here, we will have a very good outcome with this conference that will be materialized in the publications, but also in new research, in new research agendas that can be raised along this conference. I would also acknowledge and say how thankful we are from the city of Rio de Janeiro to fund both part of this conference and our BRICS Policy Center, but also to our sponsors, IPEA, the Research Institute for Applied Economics in Brasilia, the CAPES, CNPq, which are the Brazilian research agencies, and also FAPERJ, which is the State of Rio de Janeiro Research Agency, and also, and last but not least, to our staff who worked a lot during this, I don't know, last 6 or 7 months to organize this conference. So, Renata, we are really thankful to you for all your effort in managing and negotiating all along these months with GIGA and with ourselves. Our schedule is always tight, but also we are thankful to Isabelle, Aurélie, and Claudia, who actually put together both the funds and all the logistic aspects of this conference. Thank you guys very, very much. And finally, I'm really thankful, we are really thankful to Hannes Ebert, who worked along with Renata for during all this period, negotiating each step of the agenda and all the logistic aspects and all the infrastructure for this event as well. Thank you, Hannes, very, very much. So I would like to call Professor Marcelo Neri to the floor. Marcelo Neri is the Minister of Strategic Affairs, as I said, and the president of the Research Institute of Applied Economics. It's a well-known economist in Brazil and abroad. He works a lot with, he's a reference in Brazil and abroad for the area of development studies. And I have to say is also a filho da PUC, somebody who actually studied at PUC and got his bachelor degree, right, from PUC, and master's degree from PUC in economics. So thank you, Marcelo, for all the support you gave for to this conference, and thank you for coming.
Falo sentado.
Tá ali o microfone já, Marcelo.
Então, muito sucesso.
Por tudo.
Passar o slide. Okay. Good morning to everyone. I'd like to thank first Paulo Esteves from the BRICS Policy Center and Edie for this invitation. It's really a big pleasure to be back here at PUC. As he said, for me, you know, I spent all the 80s studying here, first masters and then first undergrad, masters, so it's really great to be back here. So thank Danielle for helping us to organize this seminar, and Giga, this very interesting name. My son nickname is Giga, so I kind of like it. So it's a big pleasure to be here. PUC, IPEA is organizing the academic forum for the next BRICS summit that will happen on March in Fortaleza. The good news is not yet close, but what we are working on is to have the academic forum here in Rio. It would be on 17 and 18 of March, just 2 weeks after Carnival, so maybe help to attract people coming here. So I think this is a great opportunity to discuss, you know, to use you as, you know, to discuss a little bit topics that should be addressed in this forum. So I think it's a very timely seminar. I'm going to address the topic of this seminar in a different way. I'm not an international relation person. I'm a social economist. So, you know, we'll talk about rising powers, I mean, all these topics, but within societies, within the BRICS, not, you know, between nations, but within nations. So, rising powers, I will be talking about emerging groups in these emerging countries. Contested orders, I was a little bit in doubt. Are you talking about manifestations in the streets or something? But so I'll try to address a little bit about that in the second part of my presentation. And what I believe is that we are really in a multipolar world in an individual sense, with internet, globalization, etc. Every person is empowered to participate in a rather different way compared to just a few years ago. So we'll address, you know, and this is what we are proposing to be the topic, not only of the academic forum, but of the summit, the BRICS summit. You know, the host country can propose a topic, you know, a general topic. So what we are proposing is that, you know, the president herself addresses, you know, social issues, environmental issues. I know the BRICS concept is very much an economic concept originally, and that's rather important. But I think that the main contributions of Brazil are more in the social and environmental and social in a broad sense, I think, in terms of soft power and things like that. We cannot compare, not now, not in the future, our geopolitical, economic power with China and India or the US, but in terms of the example, the role model, the social policies, I think this is what we should emphasize. So, next one, please. So, I will start showing a little bit comparable statistics on social performance within the BRIC countries. What I find very interesting in the BRICS concept, two things. First is that with just one hand, you have a very good example of what's happening around the world. As researchers, it's very hard to work with 100 countries. I mean, with the world itself, with just 5 countries, you can talk about what is new and relevant, to a large extent, in the world itself. We're talking about 40% of the world population, 50% of the world's poor population, and a part of the world wealth in 30 years' time. So just 5 countries. But what I think is really interesting is the fact that they are very different between themselves. They come from different regions, so it gives us an opportunity. We are very used, for example, in Brazil, to talk with our Latin American neighbors, which are very similar to us in many aspects, you know, high inequality, Latin, I mean, regional, climate, everything. So I think it's really the difference between these countries, the size and the difference between these countries, which is really interesting. So I think it's another way to organize, you know, this dialogue. And let me talk a little bit about income distribution and poverty in the BRIC countries. Next, please. What I'm showing here, it's okay. So what I'm showing here is the U.S. income distribution compared to the world. So that's where each percentile in the country is with respect to the world. So splitting the country's population in 100 pieces, perhaps in 100 pieces, and compare where it would be in terms of these 100 pieces across the world, okay? So what this basically saying is that the poorest in the US has 60% of the world population poorer than him. So, you know, the US income distribution starts above the median. The median is a sort of division. You divide the population, you know, the poorest half and the richest half. It's like an equator line, you know, but dividing in terms of population, equal size. So, and this is India. So the poorest of the poor in India are the poorest in the world, and the richest in India are just above the median. While in the US, you start from this point onwards. So, próximo, por favor. This is China. Next one, please. And this is Russia. So, according to this graph, we can say that that China is richer than India. So Russia is richer than China and India. Using any poverty line or any wealth line, we can say that, you know, there is a domination of the distributions, and the US is richer than all of the three. So where is Brazil? Next one. This is Brazil. Where is Brazil? Brazil is all over, you know, all over the place. The poorest of the poor in Brazil is as poor as the Indian untouchables, and the richest in Brazil are not very different from the richest persons in Russia or the US. So Brazil is close to the 45 degrees line, the one. So Brazil is kind of, is a very good, that's a point I would like to make here, is a very good representation of the world itself. So if you get the poorest in Brazil, they are as poor as the world's poorest. And if you go to the middle class, to the upper class, you have this similarity. Why? Because if you see, next slide, please. First, GDP per capita in Brazil, adjusted by purchasing power, is 91% of the world mean per capita income. So Brazil is quite close to the world mean in terms of living standards. And the second point, this is inequality within Brazil, and this is the inequality trend in the world across nations, okay, weighted by the population. So what I'm showing in this graph is that the inequality within Brazil is very similar to inequality across people, across nations. Quite similar. It was not like this before in the 60s, when inequality in Brazil was much lower, but it went up. It kept, during the economic miracle of the 60s, kept very high levels, and the world inequality started to go down, mainly because of China and India growth. So I think that's an important, we are having protests against inequality in the world, Occupy Wall Street and protests all over against inequality. But in fact, inequality in the world is falling because of China and India effect, although inequality, as I'm going to show you, is growing within China, within India, is growing 2/3 of the countries in the world. But since we have growth in China and India that hold 50% of the world's poorest, inequality in the world is falling. So perhaps we should be celebrating and not protesting against inequality, but actually we are protesting against inequality within countries, not in the world. So in the 2000s, inequality in Brazil and in the world were quite similar. And in the 2000s, there is a sharp drop of inequality in both dimensions. So what I'm trying to say here is the following. The picture of inequality in Brazil is very similar to the world inequality picture, but also the movie, the movement is very similar, the movie that happened in the 2000s. But this is the Gini, goes from 0 to 1, how much is in fact this fall of inequality? 0.59 to 0.539527, is it that big? Next slide, please. So this gives you a picture, and since the world is similar to Brazil movement, this is the 10% in the last 10 years, the rate of real growth, per capita growth rates of income in the 10% poorest, going 10 to the 10% richest. So the 10% poorest in Brazil had a per capita real growth of 91%. So it's like a stair, it's going down, while the 10% richest in Brazil had a growth of 17%. So these guys are growing 550% faster than the top 10%. So it's something that we never seen in our statistics in Brazil that started in the 60s. So this is the size of income inequality fall happened in the last 10 years in a similar picture. You can imagine a similar picture for the world itself because of mainly China and Indian growth. So it's a good example of using international references in domestic debate, domestic policies, social policies. But what we see here, Brazil is India and China, South Africa, and Russia, we don't have the data. No, we don't have the data, are poorer than Brazil. But Brazil is poorer than US, China, Europe, and so Brazil is in this intermediary position. But, next one, if you see the map of Brazil, you have, poverty levels in the south comparable to the ones observed in upper middle countries, and some poverty statistics found in poor countries. Next one. So in municipality, this is even more extreme. So a professor from this university here, Edmar Baixa, created this acronym many years ago when Brazilian inequality went up, called Brazil as Belindia, a mix of a small rich Belgium in the middle of a big and poor India. And so, there's a lot of contrast. So if you look at the average of the country, we really miss not only, the disparities within, and what the data shows is also misses the movement. The poor part of Brazil now is growing as much as India is growing, while the rich part of Brazil, or the Belgian part of Brazil, is stagnated as most European countries are. So the name is still, but now in the movements, a good name. Next one. So in terms of poverty, all BRIC countries did well, some better than others, but even South Africa, Russia, the poverty level starts from extreme poverty level from very low level, so basically went down to zero, but from very low level, it's difficult to measure. But even South Africa, lower poverty in a half in 9 years, Brazil lowered to a third in 9 years, and India and China had a big fall of poverty. We don't have India number here, but China is very, very important because of the size. So we are really talking about a massive transformation because of these two countries. But if we try to understand what is behind this fall of poverty, we see, try to understand whether it's growth, whether it's inequality, fall. Next one. We see that Brazil is following what we can call, what maybe the Chinese would call a middle path. While half of the poverty fall is explained by growth itself, average incomes going up for everyone the same, and little more than half by inequality fall. So Brazil is combining growth, not as big growth as China or India, of course, but with inequality fall. So this is, so it's a combination of both sides, respecting market rules, having growth, etc., but having active social policies, inequality reduction from a very high level, but going down. So this, I would like to emphasize this middle path, which is very different in all BRIC countries, in all other BRIC countries. Inequality is going up by a lot, like it went here during the economic miracle. So this plays against, but income growth is so big that compensates for the inequality rise. Brazil is the only BRIC country, so we are very different between us, especially Brazil in social terms. The growth is not as big as China and India, but inequality is falling. Next one. So what I propose here is to look, to BRIC countries. BRICS stand for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So the plan here is to look the BRIC countries, but BRICS stand for Brazilians, Russians, Indians, Chinese, for the people, how people are doing within these countries. So you can, so I use 4 ways of looking at it, more or less a resume of different approaches, especially Stiglitz and Fitosi and Amartya Sen report. First dimension is prosperity, how much income is growing. But what this author says, we should not look only at GDP and national accounts, but also look at household surveys. So that's what we are doing here. We are also looking at household surveys. How much people are actually internalizing to their daily lives consumption and income growth. Second point, we should not only look at the mean, as we have seen, but also at inequality movements. Next one, please. Third, we have to look at sustainability, if this process of both prosperity and equity, if they are long-lasting or if it's short-run. So we should looking at assets, not only at income flows, but stocks of wealth, different social capital, human capital, physical capital, etc. And finally, what we're going to look at people's perceptions, as in the happiness literature. How the people themselves see, not how much their income is actually rising or falling, but or other objective indicators, sewage, etc., but how they see that, how they see these changes. So we're going to follow this scheme to compare BRIC countries. Next one. So the first two items, growth and inequality. Next one. So the first thing I would like to emphasize here is this is GDP per capita growth in Brazil starting in 2003, the lower line. The second line is PNAD, National Household Survey per capita real income. So we see that according to PNAD, mean income, not talking about inequality, is growing much faster than GDP. So macroeconomists are normally not as pleased by Brazilian performance as are social scientists, even only looking at the mean, okay? So it grew 40% in real per capita terms in these 8 years, while according to macroeconomists, the living standards on average grew by 27%, so it's 50% difference. If you put inequality and look at the median Brazilian, next one, the performance is even better because inequality is falling. So the guy who is, we would say, João da Silva, or Brazilian John Smith, thinks the economy grew 65%, while macroeconomists think it grew 27%. There are different perspectives, etc. Of course, we are in a single country, so someone might be, has to be right and someone has to be wrong, but macroeconomists think we should be here. Social scientists think we are here, and João da Silva thinks it did better, So, back one, please. Voltar. What explains this difference here is the difference in deflators. Nominal, this series is exactly the same. They are different because the implicit GDP deflator has much more inflation than consumer price indices. That's what explains this difference. And I think consumer price index, we know what is in there. GDP is kind of a mix, has lots of methodological problems. I'm a social scientist, so I tend to like more this one, but I'm minority in this debate, okay? So, and this difference is explained by inequality fall, okay? So how other countries did? So this is the growth elasticity of consumption, per capita consumption. So it's always below 1 in India and China, urban total, except for urban China. And in Brazil, in this period, was above 1. So what happened is how growth, GDP, as seen by macroeconomists, reflect on average on people's living standards. So Brazil is above 1. So when you see, protests, not now, but previous, against globalization, people were protesting against globalization, while normally economists are more enthusiastic. Why? Maybe because GDP is growing faster than national household surveys that goes into people's households capture. So this is one important. If you see from 2003 to 2010, the difference between growth is 2 percentage points favorable to GDP in China compared to household surveys, while in Brazil is almost exactly the other way around. It's 1.8 higher for household surveys than for GDP. So from people's perspective, the economy is growing faster than to macroeconomies in Brazil, and the opposite happens in most of the countries, especially BRIC countries, but developed countries as well. Next one. Looking from distribution, this is the growth rate of the 20% poorest and the 20% richest in the BRIC countries. So we see that the Brazilian poor, in real per capita terms, the Brazilian rich is doing worse than all BRIC countries. I don't have Russia here, but I think similar thing happened. So if you get just the rich in Brazil, and the rich is basically us, we are in this group of 20, not basically, but include us. So the top guys are doing badly, worse than any other BRIC country, while the 20% poorest is doing better than almost all BRIC countries except China, okay? Which of course is. But so this is the inequality is going down in Brazil, as I showed, and inequality is going up and going up by a lot in all BRIC countries, including South Africa. South Africa has a Gini index of 0.67, which is unbelievable, and went up after the end of apartheid. So it's really, next one. So let's talk about the second most controversial point, which is happiness. Now, how people see their lives. So we use here the next one, the Gallup World Poll that covers 160 countries and has a very direct question to subjectively answer. How is your life satisfaction? A grade from 0 to 10, okay? Next one. So this is the resume. This is the grade given by different countries in different years, and I put it also the European countries in crisis, okay, to have an idea. So Brazilians give a grade of 6.9 from 0 to 10. It's quite a high grade compared to other BRIC countries, including Russia, which is richer than Brazil in per capita terms. But Latin American countries in particular, we tend to have very high considerations about our life satisfactions, while Eastern European people, maybe for cultural reasons, they give a lower grade consistently. But if you see the movement, not all countries are improving their happiness. This is average before the crisis, 2006 to 2008, compared to 2012 to 2010. I left 2009, which is the year of the crisis effects, out, okay? So Brazil has not only a relatively high level, we only lose to Ireland here, which has 7.6 grade from 0 to 10. But not all BRIC countries, in spite of the growth, their life satisfaction has increased in this period. In fact, if you look at regressions, what the regressions show is that growth doesn't add much to happiness. To grow is very hard. You have to work, you have to study, you have to make sacrifices, you have to save. And, but level is very important, the level of income. We see in all the European countries in crisis a big fall of happiness, especially in Greece, 25% fall off. So it's really a crisis in people's perceptions. Of course, this has lots of methodological problems, but I think it's important to hear what people have to say about their lives and use together with other indicators. So Brazil is number 18. Our best year was 2009, not because our life satisfaction increased, but because others people's life satisfaction has decreased because of the crisis. So Brazil is number 18, Russia 56, India 99, China 76, South Africa 73. So this is below the median, except for Russia. Wow. So this is life satisfaction. Next one. So the question, does money bring happiness? Now this graph comes from an Angus Deaton paper. There is in this data at least, which is very big in terms of coverage, there is a reasonably good fit between real GDP per capita and life satisfaction. Brazil, of course, is above the norm. We have more happiness than money in the pockets. Denmark has the highest level. As expected, poor countries like African countries are in the lower tail. Okay. So there is a direct relationship. So I would like to study this relationship in more detail. So next graph, please. So this is a survey we did at IPEA, big survey, 3,800 interviews, not so big, to see how this is in Brazil. So there is basic controlling for everything, a direct relationship between happiness and income within Brazil, okay? Here we use the multinational data and a wealth measure which is access to CIT's technology. It's a measure of wealth in this interpretation. So there is this direct relationship as well, as I showed. But this allows us to study the sensibility. Since I have data for each household, I can study, how much wealth affects within countries the life satisfaction answer, or the correlation. Next one. So this is the resume, and I put here the Brazil is the basis, the BRIC countries in bold. So basically, in 160 countries, 58 countries are more sensitive to their life satisfaction is more sensitive to wealth, to this wealth proxy, than in Brazil. And no other country is less sensitive than Brazil. There are others which are statistically equal to Brazil. So India is the highest sensitivity among the BRICS, then China, then Russia, but no one is less sensitive than Brazil. So Brazilians are happy because we are happy, not because our life has improved. It is also because of that, but not in comparison to other countries. So this is a kind of a cultural value. Next one. But what Brazil really is outstanding in terms of is if you ask Brazilians, give a grade to your life in 5 years' time. If you ask that, we are in the same group as United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, European countries. Next one. In fact, we have the highest life satisfaction in the world. If you ask a Brazilian, give a grade to your life in 5 years' time, your life individually is average 8.7. So, and this is a very consistent result in the Gallup surveys. Next one. These surveys went to the field 7 times. In all 7 times, we have the same answer. Brazil has the highest life satisfaction in the future. That's perhaps why we are the country of the future. We believe very much in our lives. This is not a quality, it's an attribute. This is certainly not good for savings, it's not good for investing in education, but that's how we are. So we see other BRIC countries, the level, South Africa is pretty high. And I lived in South Africa about 30 years ago. I went back about 3 years ago, and I had the same feeling I have in Brazil. It's a society in movement, full of problems, but it's moving. It's kind of, and it's a cultural thing. So this is, so Brazilians have this, and this very high life satisfaction in the future is also a characteristic of the young people. Young people tend to give very high grades to the future and not so good grades for the present or the past. So Brazil is in a ways a young country in the sense, not young demographically speaking, but young in terms of optimism with respect to the future. So compared to other BRIC countries, that's different. Because in Brazil, for us, it's not that important to be part of the BRICS, which is an economic concept. And I think Daniel will agree with me. For us, what is really important is to be part of the BIGS. What is BIGS? BIGS is Brazil, Italy, and Germany. Now, those who won most World Cups. This is what is important. You know, these intangible values, you know, in that order, okay? Brazil, Italy, and Germany. So this is how Brazil, that's how we see it. It's not very good for development, I agree. You know, not good for savings, but you have to depart from where we are. So next slide. What's our problem in Brazil? Our problem is that if you ask Brazilians to give a grade to the country, from 0 to 10, give a grade to the country in 5 years' time, the grade is much worse than the grade each individual gives to himself. That's the problem. So there is a dissonance. How can everyone be above the average? That's impossibility. And that captures something about our, psychological attitude. We are very optimistic about our individual lives, but very pessimistic about the country itself. The general happiness of the country is not as high. Next one, please. And this is showing a data. That data was 2013. That's individual, same scale, and that's for the country. So the dark colors is much more present for individuals than for the country. So, and I think what is behind that, for me, the biggest problems we have in Brazil, we have many problems that other developed countries have. Many problems. Low education, low health standards, etc. But there are things which were very studied here in this house, are problems which are more present in Brazil, which are coordination problems, and I think this dissonance captures a little bit. Collective actions related problems, like high inflation, high inequality, high criminality, which are relationship problems. So it's something that makes the whole smaller than the sum of individuals. It's collective action problems, and Brazil, not all developing countries have problems of inflation, of inequality, of criminality, lack of democracy, that's common, informality, that's common to most developing countries. So I think this, gives an insight, and we have now a big coordination problems after June in the streets, and so you probably, people from abroad may be questioning, well, Brazil is doing well, people are happy, but why people are protesting in the streets? That's a difficult question. So let me try to address a little bit of that. So I think I have a little time to, so just to sum up this last slide, then I try to show this thing on. So if you follow this sustainable development perspective, compare Brazil with other BRICS, in terms of growth of GDP, we lose by a lot from China and India in particular, but for household per capita income, the difference, we lose, but not that much. How much people incorporate in their budgets this progress. Of course, you have a long-run thing, but second thing, inequality. Inequality is falling here and rising in other BRIC countries, so this is a difference, and I will show you that's still falling now. Especially during the protests, inequality was still falling. Sustainability, I didn't address, so in a sort of looking at the protest is a way to see how much this model is sustainable, will change in a way. That's a tricky question. Labor, environmental, I think the results are good in terms of progress, not the picture, but the movement. Not savings is bad, education is still bad. So it's, but in terms of subjective well-being, Brazilians think we are happy. Maybe we are not, but we think we are. And this is, you know, it's very difficult to access lots of problems. So let me try to answer a little bit about sustainability. We just went to the field in a research to try to understand what's going on with the manifestations, etc., having a sample of a population of the whole country. So what we did in April, we went to the field with a research on in financial inclusion. So we re-interviewed the same people 4 months in July, August 2013. So let me just show you the results. Next one, please. So this is a simple regression. We just finished. Sorry, it's in Portuguese. I'll give you the main results. So we basically had the question, did you participate in the manifestations? And we had 4 possible answers. Yes, I did. No, I didn't, but I would like to. Third, I didn't, I wouldn't like to participate, but I agree with the manifestations. And the last one, none of the above, okay? I don't agree with the manifestation, didn't want to be there. First group, 3.5% of above 15 years of age. Second group, 24%. Third group, 45%. People who didn't go, didn't want to go, but think the manifestations go in the right direction. And then 25% didn't want to. So 3.5 participated, but 3/4 of the population agree to some extent to the manifestation. So we use a model that captures these differences, this gradation. So what is the main variable? The main variable is using the internet as an active source of information. People who participated are those who really not only have internet on their homes, but use that. So this, I think, is a new thing that's going on. And internet access in Brazil is rising by a lot. The level is not very high, but it's rising more than other BRIC countries. And people use a lot. Those who have access are intensive users. So it's less important in the periphery than in the capitals of the country, or the suburbs, which are the poor areas in Brazil, was less present in the northeast. Heads of households participated less. White people participated more. Males participated more. Young people participated more. That's a thing of the young. High educated people, especially university degree or university students, had a much larger participation, so high. We had an interesting variable, which is a wealth variable that we captured in the previous survey. This is important. So high-income people participated in the process. One perception of people, if people believe that the people who are poorer than him did better, this plays a role. But if you have difficult to pay your debts. So my interpretation is the following. Like the protests in Brazil are of a different sort of the protests, for example, in the US, the Occupy Wall Street, which was a protest against inequality. You know, was in Wall Street, the symbol of wealth, of unemployed people because of the crisis. In Brazil, we are close to full employment, and inequality is falling. In my opinion, I know it's risky to say that, but that's my sincere, I think inequality plays a role explaining the protest, not is a protest against inequality. That's my one reason. Why? Let's see the other. So let me try. The city of confederation, if just the last variable, if you held, you know, the Confederation's Cup in your city, this plays a role, which is strange, you know. I mean, you have, in your city, we receive money from the rest of the country, and you manifest more, so it's kind of, but let's see. Next one, please. So what happened in Brazil? Brazil had a relative, even in 2012, when we had the mini GDP, the so-called PIBinho, people's income grew, while GDP grew 0.9 in 2012, per capita GDP grew 0.1, so no growth at all, while per capita income grew at 5.1. So there is 5 percentage points difference in 2012. But what happened is that there is a big deceleration, especially this is capturing labor income. I can show you that other sources of income are growing faster. So this is a, but there is a deceleration of growth, especially labor market growth in these 6 months, initial months of the year. So Brazil labor market started to show signs on average of fatigue, of full employment, of limitations. Although it's still growing at 3.3, but much less than 5.2. The 12 years, if I use, you know, shorter, this will go down, okay? So there is a deceleration on the average. Next one. And inequality is still going down. This is July 2013. Actually went down by a lot in the last 3 or 4 months. It was more or less stable in the end of 2012, it went down. So the economy is stagnated in what people care, which is the income they take home. But if you are poor, if you are low educated, next graph, for example. So this is traditionally excluded group. Next one, please. So this is mean overall, individual income. So if you are a black person, if you're illiterate, if you had big households, if you live in suburbs, this is data to May 2013. If you are female, traditionally excluded group are doing better than the mean still. So inequality, horizontal inequality is falling in Brazil. But, you know, males, white people, high educated people, people who live in the capital are doing worse, of course, are here. So with the economy going, you know, cooling down, inequality fall means that the people who are in the traditionally included groups are doing worse. So there is, of course, there are protests against education, corruption, health problems, transportation problems. Next one. So Brazil, next one. Next one, just to finish here, to wrap up. Next. Brazil is a country of big cities. The protests are related with big cities, more than other big countries. And our cities are, you know, a big chaos in a way. And even the rural income, the next one, did better than the city's income. So Brazil may be known as the country of the future, but in the last 10 years, we have been the country of the past. The groups that were left behind, like black people, illiterate people, people who live in the northeast, in the suburbs, they are doing much better. And this is completely different to what is happening in any other BRIC country. There, the premium of education is going up. In Brazil, is going down. So what I think is very interesting in the BRIC concept is the difference between countries. And we are looking in terms of people's standard of living, taking into account that 4 points. Brazil is very different, but people are protesting. this, when the economy gets stagnated, or labor market in particular, this may create some sort of turmoil. So, next one. No, okay, I close here. Thank you very much.